They told me to sign the contract to protect the family assets. But as I sat there, staring at that thick stack of papers, I felt like I was signing my soul away. The mahogany desk gleamed under the crystal chandelier, and Michael's mother, Patricia Johnson, watched me with those cold blue eyes that never seemed to warm when they looked at me. "Remember, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she reserved for outsiders. "In case of divorce, you can't claim this." Her manicured finger tapped the clause that would strip me of any rights to their precious fortune. But what they didn't know, what none of them could ever imagine, was that I was hiding a secret worth $30 million. I should have seen it coming from the moment Michael first brought me home to meet his family. Everything about their sprawling estate screamed old money, the kind that comes with conditions and expectations. Patricia had smiled that practice smile, the one she probably learned at some finishing school, and asked me all the right questions. Where did I go to school? What did my parents do? Such innocent questions, but I could feel her calculating my worth with every answer. When I told her I worked as a legal assistant and came from a modest middle-class family, something shifted in her eyes. It was subtle, but I caught it. The way she glanced at her husband, Robert, the slight tightening around her mouth. I wasn't what they had planned for their golden boy. The ring shopping should have been my first real warning. Patricia insisted on coming with us, claiming she wanted to help choose something appropriate for the family. As we stood in the jewelry store, she kept steering Michael toward smaller diamonds, more tasteful options. "We don't want people to think we're flashy," she'd say, while simultaneously making sure the salesperson knew exactly how much money the Johnson family had. It was a performance, and I was just a prop. When Michael chose a beautiful 2-carat solitaire, I saw Patricia's face in the mirror behind us. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something that made my stomach turn. Resentment? Like I was already taking something that didn't belong to me. But there was something else in the way she looked at me, something that made my skin crawl. Have you ever felt like you were being appraised, like a piece of furniture someone was considering buying? That's how Patricia Johnson made me feel every single time she looked at me. During family dinners, she'd make little comments about girls these days and how they didn't understand the value of hard work. She'd talk about Michael's ex-girlfriend, Sarah, who came from good stock and understood family values. The message was clear. I was an outsider, and I would never truly belong. The conversations about money became more frequent as the wedding approached. Robert would mention their investment properties over dinner, always making sure to emphasize how everything was carefully protected through trusts and legal structures. Patricia would chime in with stories about friends whose sons had married the wrong type of girl and lost everything in messy divorces. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. Every comment was designed to remind me of my place, which was apparently somewhere far beneath them on the social ladder. Then came the day that changed everything. 1 week before our wedding, Patricia called and asked me to come to the house alone. "Just some last-minute details to discuss," she said, but her tone made my blood run cold. The prenuptial agreement was waiting for me on that same mahogany desk, along with their family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, who looked like he'd been handling Johnson family business since the Civil War. Patricia had arranged the papers just so, with that damning clause highlighted in yellow. "Now, Emma," she began, settling into her chair like a queen addressing a peasant, "I'm sure you'll understand that we need to protect what took generations to build." Her voice was honey sweet, but her eyes were ice cold. "This is just standard procedure, nothing personal." But everything about the way she said it felt deeply personal. The way she emphasized certain words, the way she watched my face for any reaction. She was enjoying this. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began explaining the terms in that dry legal voice that makes everything sound inevitable. No claim to family assets acquired before marriage. No claim to business interests. No claim to inherited wealth. Limited alimony in case of divorce, and only if the marriage lasted more than 10 years. As he droned on, I felt something building inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold clarity. They thought they were so smart, so thorough. They thought they had me figured out completely. But they had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I was hiding. "Remember, Emma," Patricia said again, leaning forward with that predatory smile, "in case of divorce, you can't claim this." She gestured around the room, at the oil paintings and antique furniture, at the life they'd built and were so desperate to protect from someone like me. I picked up the pen, and I could feel their relief washing over me like a wave. Poor little Emma signing away her rights without even putting up a fight. How easy this had been. How predictable. But as I signed my name with careful, deliberate strokes, I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about the secret I'd been carrying for months, the one phone call that had changed my life forever, because 3 months earlier I'd received a call from my grandfather's attorney, the grandfather I'd never really known, who died when I was 12, who'd seemed like just another family member with more stories than money, except he hadn't been. Charles Morrison, my mother's father, had been a real estate mogul who'd quietly built an empire while living like a regular, middle-class retiree. The trust fund he'd established was worth $30 million, and I was the sole beneficiary. There was just one catch. I couldn't access it until I turned 30, which was still 6 months away. But they didn't know that. None of them knew that. As I finished signing, I looked up at Patricia and gave her my sweetest smile. "Thank you for protecting the family," I said, and I meant every word. I was protecting my family, too, the family I was about to discover I'd always had. The irony was delicious. They were so busy protecting their fortune from me that they never bothered to investigate whether I might have one of my own. I'd learned long ago that the best way to hide something valuable is to let people think you have nothing worth taking. And the Johnson family had just proven they were exactly the kind of people I'd been hiding from my whole life. The wedding was beautiful, if you like that sort of orchestrated perfection. Patricia had insisted on planning every detail, from the flowers to the music to the seating arrangements that carefully segregated my modest family from their society friends. Michael looked handsome in his tuxedo, and for a moment, as we said our vows, I almost forgot about the game we were all playing. Almost. But then I caught Patricia's eye during the reception, and I saw that same calculating look. She was already planning, already thinking ahead to how she could control this marriage, control me. She had no idea that I'd been planning too. The first few months of marriage followed a predictable pattern. Patricia would drop by unannounced, always with some helpful suggestion about how I could better fit into their world. Maybe I should take some cooking classes. Michael is used to a certain standard. Maybe I should consider going back to school. Education is so important for wives of successful men. Maybe I should think about what I was bringing to the marriage besides my charming personality. Each comment was a small cut designed to remind me of my place, and I let her. I played the part of the grateful daughter-in-law, the one who was just so lucky to have married into such a wonderful family. But behind my smile, I was watching. I was learning. I was recording every conversation on my phone, documenting every slight, every insult, every moment when they showed me exactly who they were. Because I'd learned something important during my brief time in law school before switching to my legal assistant program. Evidence matters. And I was collecting evidence of just how much this family valued money over people, contracts over compassion. They thought they were teaching me lessons about my place in their world. Instead, they were teaching me lessons about their character. Michael was caught in the middle, and part of me felt sorry for him. He genuinely seemed to love me, but he loved his family's approval more. When Patricia would make her little comments, he'd just smile uncomfortably and change the subject. When she'd question my background or my motives, he'd defend me half-heartedly before finding an excuse to leave the room. He was weak, and I was beginning to understand that weakness had been bred into him over generations of privilege. He'd never had to fight for anything, so he didn't know how to fight for me. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 6 months after our wedding. I was alone in our apartment. Michael had already left for his job at his father's investment firm. When my grandfather's attorney called to tell me it was time, "Miss Morrison," he said, using my maiden name with deliberate care, "your trust fund is now available for distribution. Shall we schedule a meeting?" I looked around the apartment that Michael's parents had helped us furnish, at the life they'd so carefully constructed for us, and I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I think it's time." That afternoon, I sat in a law office downtown and listened as Mr. Chen, my grandfather's attorney, explained exactly how much money I was about to inherit. $30 million in cash, stocks and real estate holdings, properties in 3 states, investment accounts that had been quietly growing for over a decade. My grandfather hadn't just been wealthy. He'd been incredibly wealthy and incredibly careful about hiding it. "He didn't want the money to change you before you were ready," Mr. Chen explained. "He wanted you to know who you were first, before you knew what you had." As I signed the papers, different papers this time, papers that made me rich beyond anything the Johnson family could imagine, I thought about Patricia's words from the prenup meeting. "In case of divorce, you can't claim this." She was right. I couldn't claim their money, but I didn't need to. I had my own. And unlike theirs, mine hadn't come with strings attached or conditions about who I could love or how I should live my life. Mine came with a note from my grandfather. "Money is a tool, Emma. Use it wisely." The question was, what was I going to do with this tool? For weeks, I said nothing. I went through the motions of being Michael's wife and Patricia's daughter-in-law, all while $30 million sat quietly in my accounts, growing larger every day. I watched Patricia treat me like hired help, watched Michael fail to defend me, watched Robert dismiss my opinions like I was too young and too poor to understand how the world really worked. And I made my decision. The next family dinner was going to be very different. As I sat at Patricia's perfectly appointed table, listening to her explain why I should be grateful for everything they'd given me, I felt that familiar, cold clarity settling over me. They wanted to play games about money and power and control. They thought they had all the cards. But they were about to learn something important about underestimating people. They were about to learn that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous, and they were about to learn exactly what $30 million could buy, starting with the best divorce attorney in the state. But first, I wanted to watch their faces when they realized who they'd really married into their precious family. I wanted to see Patricia's expression when she understood that all her careful planning, all her legal maneuvering, all her attempts to put me in my place had been completely pointless. Because while she'd been busy protecting their fortune from me, I'd been sitting on a fortune that made theirs look like pocket change. The girl they'd forced to sign a prenup couldn't claim their assets, but she didn't need to. She had enough assets of her own to buy their entire world twice over. Have you ever wondered what happens when the person everyone underestimates turns out to hold all the real power? You're about to find out, because tonight at dinner, I was going to tell them exactly who Emma Morrison really was. And then we'd see who needed protection from whom. The dinner invitation came from Patricia herself, delivered with that fake warmth she'd perfected over decades of high society manipulation. "Family meeting," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sweetness over the phone. "We need to discuss some important matters regarding your future with Michael." I knew exactly what this was about. They'd been watching me, probably having me followed, maybe even investigating my finances. But what they'd discovered had led them to the wrong conclusion entirely, and I was about to use their assumptions against them in ways they never saw coming. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning this moment for months. Every recording, every documented slight, every piece of evidence I'd collected was about to pay off. While they thought they were calling me in for some kind of intervention, I was walking into the most important negotiation of my life. and I was holding all the cards they didn't even know existed. The $30 million sitting in my accounts was just the beginning. My grandfather hadn't just been wealthy, he'd been brilliant, and he'd taught me through his lawyers exactly how to play this game at a level the Johnsons had never imagined. I arrived at their estate that evening wearing the most expensive dress I'd ever owned, a simple black Armani that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. But they wouldn't recognize the designer, wouldn't understand the significance. To them, I was still just Emma, the legal assistant who'd gotten lucky enough to marry their son. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been about everything. As I walked into that familiar dining room, with its crystal chandelier and mahogany table, I felt the weight of $30 million behind every step. Not just the money, the power, the freedom, the ability to rewrite every rule they'd tried to impose on my life. Patricia was waiting with Robert and their lawyer, Mr. Harrison, the same man who'd overseen my prenup signing. Michael sat at the far end of the table, looking uncomfortable and avoiding my eyes. This wasn't going to be a family dinner. This was going to be an ambush. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was still the same powerless girl who'd signed their contract 6 months ago. "Emma, dear," Patricia began, her voice that perfect blend of condescension and fake concern. "We've been doing some thinking about your marriage to our Michael." The papers were already spread across the table. Divorce documents, financial settlements, custody agreements for children we didn't even have yet. They'd planned this down to the last detail, assuming I'd be grateful for whatever crumbs they decided to offer. "Now, we know the prenup limits your options," Robert said, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. "But we're prepared to be generous. A lump sum payment, maybe some help finding a new apartment." He slid a check across the table. $50,000, enough to disappear quietly to never trouble their perfect family again. They actually thought they could buy me off with pocket change. "We've also prepared a non-disclosure agreement," Mr. Harrison added, producing another stack of papers. "Nothing too restrictive, just some basic protections for the family's privacy." Translation: "Shut up about everything you've seen and heard, take the money, and never speak our name again." I picked up the check and examined it, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. $50,000. They were trying to buy $30 million worth of silence for less than the cost of Patricia's car. The irony was so perfect, I almost laughed out loud. That's when I decided to drop the first bomb. "You know," I said, setting the check down carefully, "it's funny how people always assume they know everything about someone based on appearances." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table between us. "For instance, did you know that I've been recording our conversations for months?" The color drained from Patricia's face as I pressed play on the first recording. Her voice filled the room crystal clear. "Remember, Emma, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." Then came Robert's voice. "Girls these days don't understand the value of hard work." And Mr. Harrison, "Nothing personal, just protecting what took generations to build." "You see," I continued, watching their faces transform from confidence to confusion to fear, "what you've just heard could be very damaging in a divorce proceeding, especially when combined with evidence of financial coercion, emotional abuse, and conspiracy to defraud." I had their attention now, complete, terrified attention. "My grandfather taught me something before he died. He said the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The one you underestimate so completely that you hand them the weapons to destroy you." That's when I dropped the second bomb. "Charles Morrison," I said, letting the name hang in the air. "You might want to look him up. He was my grandfather, the real estate mogul who built Morrison Holdings into a $3 billion empire before his death." I watched recognition dawn on Robert's face first. He knew that name, knew exactly how much money it represented. He left me a trust fund, $30 million to be exact. It became available 6 months after my marriage. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia's mouth actually fell open. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "So, you see," I continued, picking up their pathetic check and tearing it in half. I don't need your $50,000. I don't need your apartment or your help or your pity. What I do need is justice. And thanks to your own words recorded on my phone, I'm about to get it. Mr. Harrison was frantically shuffling through papers, probably trying to figure out how badly they'd miscalculated. The prenup you forced me to sign, it protects your assets from me, but it doesn't protect you from what I can do with mine. And what I can do is hire the best divorce attorney in the country and drag this family through every court in the state. But even as I spoke, even as I watched their perfect plan crumble around them, I could see Patricia's mind working. She wasn't just rich, she was smart and she was ruthless. "Interesting story, Emma," she said, her voice steady despite the bomb I just dropped. "But if you think you can blackmail this family, you're sadly mistaken. We have resources you can't imagine, connections you've never dreamed of. Whatever little trust fund you think you have, we can tie it up in court for decades." She leaned forward, and I saw the real Patricia Johnson. Not the society matron, but the predator underneath. "You want to play games with us? Let's play." That's when I realized I'd made a crucial error. I'd assumed they would crumble when faced with evidence of their manipulation, that they'd be ashamed of their behavior and desperate to settle quietly. Instead, I just declared war on a family that had been winning these kinds of battles for generations. They weren't afraid of my money. They were energized by the challenge. Robert was already on his phone, probably calling their most expensive lawyers. Patricia was making notes on a legal pad, mapping out their counterattack. And Michael? Michael was looking at me like he'd never seen me before, like I'd transformed into something alien and dangerous right before his eyes. The next few weeks became a masterclass in how money really works when it goes to war with itself. The Johnsons hired a team of investigators who dug into every aspect of my life, my family's life, even my grandfather's business dealings from decades ago. They contested the validity of my trust fund, claiming Charles Morrison had been mentally incompetent when he established it. They filed injunctions to freeze my assets pending the outcome of their investigation. They even tried to have me declared mentally unstable, using my recorded conversations as evidence of paranoid behavior. But they'd forgotten something crucial about me. I wasn't just rich now. I was educated. Those years working as a legal assistant hadn't been wasted. I knew how the system worked, knew where the bodies were buried, knew which judges could be trusted, and which ones were in the pockets of families like the Johnsons. And more importantly, I'd inherited more than just money from my grandfather. I'd inherited his legal team, the same attorneys who'd helped him build his empire while staying completely under the radar. Mr. Chen, my grandfather's lawyer, introduced me to Sarah Martinez, the most feared divorce attorney on the East Coast. "Your grandfather specifically requested that we recommend her if you ever needed our help with complex family situations," he explained with a knowing smile. Sarah was everything the Johnson family lawyers weren't: hungry, brilliant, and completely unimpressed by old money and older connections. "They want to play dirty?" she said after reviewing my evidence. "Good. I've been waiting for an excuse to take this family down a peg or two." The legal war that followed was brutal and public in ways I'd never anticipated. The Johnsons tried to paint me as a gold digger who'd seduced their innocent son, then revealed myself as a manipulative schemer once I had access to their family. I was portrayed as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and morally bankrupt. Society pages that had once ignored me entirely now ran daily updates on my supposed crimes against the Johnson family legacy. Patricia gave interviews where she tearfully described how I'd betrayed their trust and manipulated their generous hearts. But Sarah Martinez was a master at turning narratives around. She released carefully edited portions of my recordings, showing the world exactly how the Johnson family treated people they considered beneath them. She documented every instance of emotional abuse, every attempt to control and manipulate me, every moment when they'd made it clear that I was nothing more than an obstacle to be managed. The public ate it up. America loves a story about rich bullies getting their comeuppance, especially when the victim fights back with evidence instead of just accusations. The breakthrough came when Sarah's investigators uncovered something the Johnsons had tried desperately to hide. Michael had known about my trust fund all along. Not the amount. Even he hadn't expected $30 million. But he'd known his wife wasn't the poor little legal assistant she appeared to be. His own Google searches were preserved in his browser history. Emma Morrison Trust Fund, Charles Morrison Estate, Morrison Holdings Inheritance. He'd married me knowing I had money coming, planning to get his hands on it while keeping me under his family's thumb with that prenup. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Patricia had done to me. Her cruelty was expected. She'd been protecting what she saw as her territory from day one. But Michael had looked me in the eye on our wedding day and promised to love and protect me, all while knowing he was part of a conspiracy to control and exploit me. The man I'd thought was weak was actually complicit. The husband I'd been trying to protect was actually one of my enemies. That revelation changed everything about how I approached the war. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about survival. If Michael had been planning to manipulate me from the beginning, if the entire family had been orchestrating my subjugation while pretending to welcome me, then I couldn't afford to show any mercy. They'd made it clear that they saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Now they were going to learn what it felt like to be on the other side of that equation. The final battle took place not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Sarah had been building toward this moment for months, gathering evidence not just of how the Johnsons had treated me, but of how they'd treated others. Former employees who'd been fired for minor infractions, business partners who'd been cheated out of their fair share, even other daughters-in-law who'd been driven away by Patricia's psychological warfare. We had enough evidence to destroy their reputation completely, and their business depended entirely on that reputation. The day I walked away from my marriage, I had everything I'd ever wanted and nothing I thought I'd needed. The $30 million was mine, free and clear. The Johnson family's reputation was in tatters, their business partnerships dissolving as their clients learned exactly what kind of people they really were. Michael was facing his own legal troubles as investigators looked into his role in the scheme to defraud me. And Patricia? Patricia was discovering what it felt like to be powerless for the first time in her privileged life. But as I stood in my new penthouse apartment, looking out at a city that now knew my name, I felt something I hadn't expected. Emptiness. I'd won the war, but I'd lost something in the process. The girl who'd walked into that prenup meeting 6 months earlier had believed in love, in family, in the possibility that people could change. The woman standing at this window knew better. I'd learned that money really was the only thing that mattered, that trust was a luxury only fools could afford, that everyone had a price and everyone would eventually try to collect it. The foundation I established in my grandfather's name became my way of channeling that hard-won knowledge into something positive. We provided legal assistance to people facing financial manipulation in their marriages, helped victims of prenup fraud, funded investigations into family financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the Johnson family's own tactics against people like them, but this time for the right reasons. Money was still a weapon, but now I was wielding it to protect people instead of destroying them. But late at night, in the quiet of my expensive apartment, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd told Michael about the trust fund from the beginning, if I'd confronted Patricia directly instead of playing her game, if I'd walked away the moment they showed me who they really were instead of staying to fight, would I have found a different kind of victory? Would I have become a different kind of person? The answer came to me on a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after that final dinner with the Johnson family. I was reviewing applications for the foundation when I saw a familiar name, Michael Johnson, requesting legal assistance for his divorce proceedings. Apparently, Patricia had decided her son was as much of a liability as I'd been. She was using the same tactics on him that she'd used on me, trying to strip him of his inheritance and his place in the family business. The golden boy had finally learned what it felt like to be expendable. For a moment, I considered rejecting his application. After everything he'd done, everything he'd been part of, didn't he deserve whatever his mother was planning to do to him? But then I remembered my grandfather's note. Money is a tool, Emma. Use it wisely. The wisest thing I could do was break the cycle. Instead of perpetuating the cruelty I'd experienced, I could choose to be better than the people who'd tried to destroy me. I approved Michael's application, but I made sure he knew exactly who was helping him. When we met in my lawyer's office to discuss his case, he looked like a broken man, older, thinner, humbled in ways that money couldn't fix. "I don't understand why you're helping me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After everything we did to you, everything I did to you." "Because," I told him, "someone has to be the person we needed when we were in trouble. Someone has to choose love over revenge, healing over hurting. Your family taught me that money can be a weapon. My grandfather taught me it could be a tool. I'm choosing to make it a bridge instead." It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that yet, and maybe I never would be. But it was something better. It was the choice to stop the cycle of cruelty that had poisoned his family for generations. 6 months later, I received a letter from Patricia Johnson. She was writing from a much smaller house, having lost most of her social standing and all of her influence. The letter was brief and, for the first time since I'd known her, completely honest. "I taught you to see people as either assets or threats," she wrote. "You chose to see them as human beings instead. I don't know if I'll ever understand how you found the strength to be better than we were, but I'm grateful that you did. Michael is rebuilding his life because of your kindness. Maybe someday I'll find a way to do the same." I never responded to that letter, but I kept it, not as a trophy or a reminder of my victory, but as a reminder of what real power looks like. It's not the ability to destroy your enemies, it's the ability to choose not to, even when you have every right to want revenge. The $30 million had given me financial freedom, but choosing compassion over cruelty had given me something far more valuable. It had given me the ability to sleep peacefully at night, knowing I'd used my power to heal instead of hurt. In case of love, I'd learned, everyone deserves protection, even the people who forgot how to protect others. The Johnson family had tried to teach me that money was everything. Instead, they'd taught me that how you use it is what defines who you really are. And that lesson, more than any amount in any bank account, was worth more than they could ever imagine.